Thank you. I would like to thank especially John Henninger and the John Paul II Forum, and Mary Catherine Summers with the Center for Thomistic Studies for inviting me here. Hi, it's an honor to be here, and I'm glad that you have shown up. More than anything, in the last couple of days, I've received sort of blank stares when the topic of transhumanism is brought up, which I guess I hadn't expected. I teach bioethics, so I'm used to weird things. This is one weird thing, and I just assumed other people were kind of used to these weird things. But evidently not. A lot of people have asked me, what is transhumanism? Well, I'll just give a brief description before I begin my talk. Transhumanism, think science fiction, I guess, first of all. It's the idea that we can transform human beings through genetic manipulation, through technological enhancement, even to the point of uploading our brains and personalities to computers. And the idea is that we can make ourselves superhuman, even transhuman, super intelligent, super strong, maybe develop new powers and things along this line. And when I speak about the roots of transhumanism, I am not talking about the historical roots. I'm talking about what I consider to be the moral roots and foundations of transhumanism. I'd like to begin with just a little quote from Frankenstein, which is obviously connected with this topic. Frankenstein monster, when he finally meets his maker, Frankenstein, makes a very good case to Frankenstein that Frankenstein has neglected his responsibilities to him, that he created him and then he left him. In the midst of this conversation he's having, he says, he speaks about his misery. He's a very miserable individual, and he says, "Am I not alone, miserably alone?" And I just want you to keep that in mind as I read. It's sort of a theme of where this talk is going. All right, transhumanism has lost sight of the simple goods in human life. This movement, which proclaims a new age of technologically enhanced human beings, promises results and marvels that will free us forever from the woes and evils that have plagued human history. Death and disease, ignorance and selfishness will all be overcome. I wish to suggest, however, that the accomplishment of these promises is more to be feared than welcomed. It will arise from a sickness of soul that will lead inexorably to emptiness and despair, and ultimately to fresh horrors of human cruelty. In the long run, good intentions, when pursued without constraints, can be more harmful than bad intentions. Some of the greatest atrocities of our age have arisen from a misguided desire to accomplish good. I wish to suggest that the transhumanist movement embodies one such misguided desire. This movement seeks to enhance human beings, giving them greater strength, intelligence, perception, and so on. Perhaps even creating entirely new powers, such as the ability to fly, or even powers unimagined as of yet. These new creatures will transcend human nature, hence the name transhumanism. One might well wonder whether this movement has more to do with science fiction than with science. Perhaps its grand visions are mostly fanciful. Nevertheless, current technologies have some very real applications, and others are not far in the future. We can use growth hormone, for instance, to increase a child's height. We can use stimulants to increase concentration. In the near future, various proteins multiplied through gene splicing may well increase our memories. Like its forebear, the eugenics movement, the transhumanism will result in terrible deeds. Transhumanism sometimes claims to be a liberal eugenics, purified of all that was evil in the old eugenics. The human race will improve by free choice, they say, and not by government intervention. On this view, eugenics is not bad in itself. It just happened to get linked with an unfortunate philosophy. But what if the link is not accidental? Already, clouds appear on the horizon, foreshadowing the storm that will break upon us. Some have suggested that parents have an obligation to choose a child without defects, or even possibly to choose enhanced children. A neglected obligation sometimes demands coercion, as in the case of deadbeat dads. If the benighted masses do not follow the pipings of transhumanists, then they may need to be forced to comply, for their own good, of course. My general claim is simply that the error of transhumanism is rooted in its underlying attitudes. The use of technological enhancements arises from a sickness of the soul. Most fundamentally, it arises from pride. This pride itself, however, is linked to ingratitude, and these two vices together bring forth a false love, revealed most poignantly in a hatred for the weak and imperfect. Two nearly identical actions with nearly identical results might arise from quite distinct attitudes, by which I mean a pattern of motivation. One action might be good and the other evil, although their upshots are much the same. The act of enrolling one's child in the best private academy might be an act of love, providing the best environment for the enrichment of one's child. On the other hand, it might be an act of heavy-handed control, by which the parents hope to assure that their child will get ahead in the world. The results may be ostensibly positive for the child. Nevertheless, there is more to life than results. Our human good is constituted through relations with others. More important than the results of our actions are the attitudes from which they arise. A small deed done with great love is of far more significance than a great deed done with meager love. And a great deed done out of anger or ambition is destructive rather than constructive. Transhumanists use the analogy with the overbearing parenting to their advantage. Overbearing parents might enroll their child in the best preparatory school, but truly loving parents might do the same. Similarly, someone might seek enhancements out of a kind of overbearing love, but perhaps someone else might seek enhancements for the good of the child. I wish to claim that the technological enhancements are different in this regard. While the use of a good preparatory school can arise from both good and bad attitudes, the use of technological enhancements, when done with full knowledge, cannot arise from true love. Enhancements cut at the core of love. They undermine the very good that love seeks. In fact, transhumanism is necessarily infected with three destructive attitudes: pride, ingratitude, and overbearing love. Self-hatred often arises from a kind of overbearing love for oneself. An individual sets an impossible ideal, and when he does not live up to it, when he faces failure, then his own deficiency becomes an evil against which he strikes out. Likewise, the old eugenics set up an ideal and then sought to suppress failure by eliminating those who did not live up to it. Today, when parents discover that their unborn child has Down syndrome, they often choose to abort. He does not live up to the ideal. He is a disappointment that must be eliminated to make way for the satisfactory child. Similarly, transhumanism wishes to create an ideal. When human beings fail from this ideal, I suggest, transhumanism will turn to a kind of self-loathing, a hatred of the species as it is now realized. It will strike out in retaliation against those Luddites who refuse to accept its brand of salvation. A transhumanist might well object that I am overstating the case. Certainly, it may be reasonable to see a tendency in transhumanism towards overbearing love. Like an overbearing parent, transhumanism sets high ideals. Like overbearing parents, the means chosen to achieve this ideal is more forceful, one might say, since it is achieved apart from the child's cooperation. Nevertheless, these points do not establish a necessary link between transhumanism and overbearing love. They indicate only a tendency. This is still not my view, but the argument of the transhumanists. The same sort of tendency might be found in parents who place their child in an excellent preparatory school. A significant percentage of these parents may have a predominance of overbearing love. Nevertheless, truly loving parents can send their children to excellent schools. Similarly, so the argument goes, using technological enhancements to bolster the capabilities of one's child might often arise from overbearing love. No necessary connection, however, makes it so. I wish to suggest, however, that there is a necessary connection. The use of technological enhancements always arises from something besides true love, often from overbearing love, and inevitably, as we will see, from ingratitude and from pride. Drawing this connection requires a consideration of a topic to which transhumanism is averse, namely human nature. The good cannot be realized apart from some nature. The good of a knife is to be sharp, and the good of a hammer is to be heavy and dull. Being sharp just by itself is not good. It is good as realized in certain natures, such as a knife, but not in others, such as a hammer. Similarly, the human good is the good of a human nature. Such goods as strength or intelligence are good for our human nature, but not for a rock. Unfortunately, in our age, we have no clear notion of human nature. Any nature involves a direction to some end or good. A knife is directed towards cutting, and by its nature, an eye is directed towards seeing. Similarly, human nature involves some impulse or direction to an end. We do not create our end or good. It is received from our nature. The error of transhumanism will be precisely to try to create what can only be received. The transhumanists suppose that they will transcend human nature, but inevitably they imagine another sort of nature, namely a disembodied consciousness. Of course, they're typically materialists, so this consciousness is disembodied only in the sense that it arises from pure structure and can be reincarnated simply by replicating the structure. This consciousness might be realized in a human body, but, they suppose, it might also be realized in a computer. In either event, we can attribute certain goods to it, for instance, greater intelligence or greater power to act. If, in fact, human beings are not disembodied ghosts that happen to reside in a biological machine, if, in fact, we are by nature embodied reasons, then taking away our bodies will not serve our good. We can imagine that placing our minds into a machine can serve our good, but this wishful thinking is possible only because we have presupposed something about our nature. We have presupposed that we are disembodied consciousness. Transhumanism, then, cannot avoid promoting one vision of the good life over another. It cannot avoid presuppositions about human nature. Transhumanists might well ask, why should we so narrowly seek only the good of human nature? Why cannot we pursue the good of superior beings that will eventually replace us? Transhumanism hopes to get beyond our particular prejudices, which self-interestedly seek the human good. It hopes for new horizons. It selflessly admits that our good is not the whole good. The good of other beings might surpass our own. This self-proclaimed nobility of transhumanism, however, is based upon another illusion, namely the lie of selfless altruism, which supposes that we can pursue the good just in itself, apart from its being connected with our own good. In fact, no such altruism exists or can exist. If we seek the good of others, it is because we seek to share our good with them. We never seek a good that has nothing to do with our own. We seek a good that is shared between ourselves and others. I will attempt to illumine the shared human good through an analogy with works of art. When an artist paints, he hopes to capture in the painting some share of the beauty that he has perceived and seized within his own mind. When he succeeds, we say that the painting reflects the genius of the artist. A single painting, however, cannot capture the genius of a great artist. Only several works together reflect the full measure of his genius. In a similar fashion, the human good is a share in a certain beauty, the beauty of rational nature, which cannot be fully captured in a single individual. A single human being cannot realize the rational good, most dramatically because he is mortal. He will live but a short time. Consequently, human beings can attain the rational good only through an immortality realized through procreation. One individual can realize the rational good only in a limited slice of time. To realize it more fully, he must share his good in the prolongation of the species. Even apart from mortality, which, after all, transhumanism hopes to overcome, a single individual cannot fully realize the beauty contained within rational nature. Just as the beauty within the artist's mind has a diversity that cannot be captured in a single painting, so rational nature cannot be captured in a single individual. The rational good contains a variety of elements, such as coming to grasp the truth. No individual, however, can completely comprehend the whole of truth. Each individual realizes a part of the human good. Only together do we as human beings begin to reflect the multifaceted aspects of the beauty of human nature. Of course, underlying this whole analogy, it's not too difficult for you all to see that God is the artist that is making the painting. When we seek our individual good, then, we seek to share in a greater good. Our good is not solitary. It is had in union with others. By seeking the good of others, we do not seek a good wholly separated from our own. Rather, we seek our good, a good that is attained only together with others. Just as the members of a soccer team seek the good of playing together, so those who seek the human good seek to attain it together. We fool ourselves if we imagine that we can will for someone a good in which we have no share. Even the individual who sacrifices his life for another still seeks a good that is shared, for he has come to see the good of the other as his good, which is precisely what it means to love someone. He and his friends share in a greater good, which they attain in union, even in the union of offering oneself for the other. Transhumanism, then, does not get beyond human nature, as if it sought some good in which human nature has no share. Rather, transhumanism misconceives human nature. It supposes that human nature is simply disembodied consciousness, which can be transferred from a body to a computer, and which can be elevated in unforeseen ways. Genetically modified human beings, of course, can still share in the human good. They still have a human nature, and they still reflect various aspects of the beauty found within this nature. The problem here is not that there is no good to be willed. The problem is, how is the good treated? Is it treated as something to be shared, or is it treated as something to be created? How do paintings share in the beauty found within the artist? In part, through being similar to that beauty. There's something more, however. The beauty in the painting must come about in the proper manner. That is, it must come about from the artist. If it does not, then it does not share in the good of the artist. Suppose that some third party doctors up a painting, altering features here and there. Whatever else these additions might do, they will not help the painting to share in the good of the artist. Even if they are improvements of some sort or other, they will not be improvements as a work of this artist. Whatever good they bring about, then, will be no sharing in the good of the artist. They will distort the original. By analogy, we can see that technological enhancements aim at no share in the human good. We share in the human good not only by having features that apply to our rational natures. We share in the human good insofar as we and our features arise from human nature itself, which human nature achieves through procreation. All manner of technological reproduction, even those that involve no genetic manipulations, such as in vitro fertilization, attempt to get around our origins within human nature. They do not aim to share in the human good, which is a good that arises from nature. They attempt to create a good of their own. Of course, they cannot entirely exclude human nature, so the offspring still share in this nature. Nevertheless, the act of manufacturing a human being is not an act that seeks to share in the human good. Transhumanists are averse to the idea of receiving goods from nature. The goods of nature, Nicholas Bostrom complains. He's one of the gurus of transhumanism. He says, the goods of nature are not always good. Disease and deformity come from nature, as well as strength and intelligence. If we must receive all our goods from nature, then we'll be left impotent in the face of its evils. Should we do nothing to correct a cleft palate, because it is a sharing in the good of nature? In opposition to this transhumanist argument, we find a typical response based upon a distinction between enhancement and treatment. Enhancements add perfection onto a child's disposition. Healing or treatment corrects defects within a child's disposition. Since a cleft palate and poor vision are defects, we can intervene with technology, correcting these problems. On the other hand, increasing a normal child's height, intelligence, or strength is not the correction of a defect, but an enhancement. It is one thing to correct a child's eyesight so that he has 20/20 vision. It is another to give a child the far-seeing vision of an eagle. Needless to say, this distinction is hotly disputed by the transhumanists. Fortunately, I haven't time to delve into it for this talk. Does nature, then, give both good things and defects, as the transhumanists complain? Certainly, if by nature is meant something like Mother Nature, that is, the sum total of all non-human causal interactions. But no one is suggesting that we must accept whatever comes from nature in this sense. If by nature is meant human nature, then what nature provides is a diversity of good things. It does so by a reproductive power that can sometimes fail. It might fail because Mother Nature intervenes, causing some defect. It might fail because the mechanism itself is defective, presumably through some prior intervention of Mother Nature. In neither event does the defect come from human nature itself. As I have suggested, human nature involved a directedness to some end. Furthermore, we can see that this end is a shared good. This end and this sharing must both be received from nature. We cannot create our own end. We cannot share the good except by receiving it, and we can receive it only from nature. Among the various directions or tendencies within human nature, we find the impulse to share that nature through having a child. It is this sharing that we must learn to accept from nature as a true good. The distinction between treatment and enhancement is only a first step. It reveals that technological interventions are acceptable when done in order to treat a defect of nature. It does not reveal that technological intervention to bring about enhancements are wrong. Clearly, some attempts to enhance are perfectly acceptable. A man can enhance his muscles through a rigorous workout program. Another man might accomplish the same enhancement by way of steroids. Is the first approach acceptable while the other is wrong? Or are the two approaches just two morally indifferent means towards the same goal? Someone might believe that having his child listen to Mozart increases her intelligence. Someone else might choose to splice intelligence genes into his child. Both approaches aim at the enhancement of increased intelligence. Is one approach acceptable and the other not? Some methods of improving ourselves are perfectly acceptable. Indeed, part of what we have received from our nature is the ability to improve ourselves. By improving ourselves, then, we actually further the good we have received from nature. Changing ourselves for the better is not opposed to receiving goods from nature. The very act of improving ourselves is also an act of seeking a good that arises from nature. Some enhancements, however, are natural and others are unnatural. To draw this distinction, we must look again to the good at which nature aims. It seeks the diverse realization within multiple individuals of the many aspects of human nature. One aspect of human nature that needs to be realized is self-improvement, as well as the improvement of others. Nature provides for this self-improvement, giving us the power to realize our potential. We can improve our physical nature by eating healthy and by exercise. We can improve our mental nature by study and providing an environment conducive to learning. Are there any means of self-improvement, or the improvement of others, that aim at a good apart from nature? I will suggest that some such inappropriate means can be clearly identified, while others are at least suspect, although less clearly opposed to nature. Nature has provided the means of dispersing diverse natural dispositions through our power to reproduce. These natural dispositions, then, are received as a good of nature through this natural power. Any attempt to get around the power of reproduction, whether through simply in vitro fertilization or through genetic manipulation, is an attempt to achieve the good of nature without nature. It severs us from the true good, which is a reflection of human nature and not of ourselves. It leaves us only with our isolated accomplishments. The use of pharmaceuticals to achieve enhancement, as opposed to treatment, is suspect. It is natural to take in nutrients, and some of these nutrients might be better for us than others. Some might lead to improvements, or something like enhancements, whether physical or mental. It is completely natural, then, to control our diet in order to improve ourselves. This natural power appears to be hijacked for another purpose, however, when it is used not to take in healthy nutrients, but to take in a chemical directed simply towards a change in our person. Likewise, the use of technology seems suspect when it becomes, in some manner, a part of us. It is one thing to use binoculars in order to improve our vision. It would be another thing to implant an enhancing lens or cornea within our eye. The former does not change our very selves, while the latter certainly encroaches upon our makeup. That which we have received from nature is changed. It is not accepted, but replaced. In practice, the precise distinction may not be that relevant. Perhaps every instance of the use of steroids for enhancement pursues some isolated good, an accomplishment apart from nature, but perhaps not. Perhaps some instances fit within the order received from nature. In practice, however, it seems that the use of steroids arises almost universally from the attitude of independence and of separation. The use of steroids is what Michael Sandel, calls hyperagency, an attempt to make my improvement entirely my own. Even without a precise demarcation, then, we can say that the unnatural enhancements described above arise with near inevitability from the destructive attitudes that we will now proceed to analyze. As I said, transhumanism is averse to accepting the good things that come from nature. It prefers good things made by human beings, made in China, perhaps. Underlying this preference are the two attitudes mentioned previously, ingratitude and pride. When someone receives a gift but is dissatisfied with it, wanting something more, we recognize ingratitude. If someone receives a new computer and complains that it's not powerful enough, even going so far as to turn it in for another, he is not grateful for the good that he has received. When we receive a gift, we recognize that it is not simply our good. It is a good shared with the giver. As we have suggested, when we receive the diverse attributes of nature, we accept them as a sharing in the human good. They are not simply our own goods. But if we should desire the goods of nature, or that which is like the goods of nature, simply as our own, as coming from ourselves, then we would exhibit pride, which desires a singular excellence. In this case, the excellence is to have an individual good that comes from ourselves. The fallen angels, says St. Thomas, suffered from precisely this kind of pride. They did not desire what was evil. Rather, their error was the manner in which they desired what is good. They desired it simply from themselves and for themselves. They did not want their good to be received from God. They wanted it to be their own accomplishment. They did not want their good to be a sharing in God's good. They wanted it simply to be their own. In a similar manner, transhumanism seeks attributes that are truly good, such as greater strength or intelligence, but it seeks them not as a sharing in the good of human nature. The unwillingness to submit to another is typical of pride. In this case, transhumanism does not wish to submit to the dispensations of nature. Consequently, it clutches to an isolated good, a good that is not a sharing in the human good. Transhumanists might well concede the point. So what, they might ask? What is the value of sharing in an inadequate good? Why not exceed this natural good? Pride, as in this case, can rarely see the folly of its ways, and the ingrate does not often recognize his debt, even when it is pointed out to him. What is difficult to deny by almost anyone, however, is the importance of love. Consequently, we'll turn our focus towards love in the hope of identifying the destructive character of ingratitude and pride. In order to recognize the nature of false love, it will be helpful to investigate self-love and self-hatred. We do not suppose that low self-esteem arises from a healthy self-love. To the contrary, it exhibits aspects of self-hatred. Nevertheless, it is founded in a kind of self-love, as is all our activity. Paradoxically, it is founded in something of an overgrown self-love. The person wants such a grand good for himself that when he sees how far he fails from this ideal, he becomes downcast and self-critical. He is dissatisfied with his own small accomplishments, since he wants greater things for himself. The person with low self-esteem is apt to seek to improve himself out of self-hatred, wishing to rid himself entirely of his hateful failings. When he fails yet again to eliminate his undesirable traits, he sometimes turns to self-mutilation, whether psychological or physical. In this manner, enhancements upon oneself might turn out to be a kind of self-mutilation, an attempt to eliminate the person one hates and to replace it with something new and improved. It is no accident that the enhancements of cosmetic surgery are promoted in advertisements by convincing people that their appearance is defective. How are we to find a balance between defeatism and improvements arising from self-hatred? By accepting the limited nature of our good. I don't mean accepting the present state of our good, that is, accepting the fact that we are now imperfect, although this acceptance will follow. Rather, I mean accepting that what it means for us to be good, our good, not just as it is imperfectly realized, but even if it were to be fully accomplished, is limited and partial. Our good is precisely to be a part. As such, our good, by its nature, is received. When we recognize the limited nature of our good, then we see that, despite our failings, we have some share in the good. Indeed, we see that we are good. Our goodness arises from the fact that we are a part, even if an imperfect part. As a part, we are ordered to the good of the whole, and this very ordering gives us a share in the good. We are not good through a collection of grand perfections. We are good through our loneliness, through our being a part. From his role within the whole, an individual can recognize his imperfections and realize what good he has yet to strive for. He acknowledges, however, that his imperfections must be overcome as received. They must be overcome not simply from himself. The resulting perfection will not simply be his. It will be ours. It will belong to all those who have helped. It will belong to human nature itself. From this point follows another insight. He might have to live with his imperfections for some time. Indeed, it might be better to live with his imperfections than to attain perfections in the wrong way, as if they were only his. It is better to rejoice in his small share of the received good than to strive after solitary and exalted accomplishments. It may take him some time to learn how to depend upon others. It may take him some time to learn how to depend upon his fragile nature. He must learn to be happy with what he has received. He must learn gratitude. What of the person who seeks his own exaltation, who seeks his own good as isolated and independent? According to his own conception of the good, his goodness is not received. His goodness is not on account of his being a part within the whole. Rather, his goodness depends entirely upon his own perfections. Consequently, he learns to hate his imperfections, which are destructive of his only good. When he realizes how embedded his imperfections are within him, he learns to hate himself. What happens to the individual who does achieve his own exaltation? The one who succeeds rather than fails, perhaps becoming among the best in his field. Has he not attained the good thing in which he can rejoice? Unfortunately, if this individual does in fact seek his own independent greatness, then he is cut in the same pattern as those with low self-esteem. He has not learned to love himself, or rather, his self-love is distorted. The individual who rejects his role as part also rejects the shared good. In rejecting this good, he is preferring some other, namely his own individual good, which he prefers because he has perceived it as better than the shared good. Why? Because it arises from himself without being received. Once he pursues this first independent excellence, then he may go on to desire another excellence, namely a greater degree of the good than he would have insofar as he is apart. He might desire, for instance, greater intelligence. In any event, he desires his good comparatively, as better than the good that belongs to him as a part. What he comes to love is his own good, insofar as it excels, insofar as it is better than others. Those who pursue this self-exaltation will be dissatisfied when they recognize, in their moments of honesty, that their own good is still rather limited. They will learn to hate their true limited selves. They love only the false image they present of themselves. Since they have no goodness from what they are, but only from their perfections, they are forced to imagine themselves as more perfect than is really the case. From this portrayal of false self-love, it is not difficult to see how a rejection of the received good distorts our love of others. Parents who want super excellence for their children do not really love their children. Like the person with low self-esteem, they do not desire the good of their child as a part, as received from the whole. They begin to despise their true limited child, and they drive him on to ever further accomplishments so that they can take satisfaction in their imagined ideal child. They find no good in the child apart from his accomplishments. The child is not good insofar as he is a part. He is good, they suppose, insofar as he excels beyond the part, independently of any role within the whole. This independent goodness, however, can only be the goodness of individual perfections. When the child falls short of this ideal, then he has no goodness in himself by which he might be loved. We can see then why the love of others always involves a shared good. A friend is first of all good by sharing in the whole, not by having a list of perfections. When we desire some good for her, we desire it for her as she is, as an imperfect part that can become better. If, on the other hand, she has only the good of her perfections, then we cannot will the good for her as an imperfect individual. Rather, the imperfections must be removed, and we will anything for her only insofar as she is perfect. Ultimately, an individual, even when he has a distorted love, must conceive the person loved as in some manner united with himself. When the good is conceived as a singular excellence, however, it is not the union of two parts within a whole. Rather, the person loved is probably conceived as an extension of the lover. The perfections of the child, for instance, are perceived as the perfections of the parent. Typically, the child perceives this backhanded love. He perceives that the goods he receives, the excellent education, the special training in sports, and so on, are not goods meant for himself. He learns to hate these goods. He longs for a shared good, a good, however small, that he has with others, and which the others desire for his sake. This portrayal of overbearing love may well be uncontested. What will be contested is the link between technological enhancements and overbearing love. The act of sending a child to a top-ranked preparatory school can arise from true love or false love. In contrast, I claim, the act of technological enhancements excludes true love. I do not mean that parents who seek technological enhancements have no love for their child. Rather, I mean that the act of enhancing itself cannot be an act of true love, but only of overbearing love. Technological enhancements are destructive of love. The pursuit of them necessarily severs the good of the whole of which it should be a part. The desire for a good not received from nature exhibits pride, a pride that seeks to excel beyond the good of the part. The consequent deformed good is isolated, unable to be shared. All that remains of this good is its excellence, and the one for whom it is desired is perceived as good simply as excellent. The technological enhancements, then, cannot be desired for the individual insofar as she is good. It must be desired for her in order to make her good. She is loved not as a limited part that is good through her order to the whole. Rather, she is loved only as super-excelling. Her limited nature comes to be hated. Enhancements, then, are a kind of mutilation, a destruction of the perceived evil in the individual and a replacement with something more desirable. The root of this disorder is pride, pride wedded to ingratitude. The partial good is despised because it is limited. Its first limitation is precisely that it is received, for it is a kind of excellence to create things from oneself. What we forget is that it is also an excellence to receive. When we reject what is received, we are ungrateful. By his nature, the ingrate cuts himself off, holding his good only as his own. Other goods are disdained. A single act of enhancing is but one instance of such pride and false love. It might well arise, however, from a more general disposition of pride. At the very least, it will give rise to this disposition. Once the attitude of enhancement becomes a settled mindset, then the partial good will be despised. The love of exaltation will turn to hatred of what is lowly. The Down syndrome child is not wanted. Inferior races must be purged. Defective individuals are mistakes relegated to the fringe of society. What begins in the tones of high-minded pursuit of a great ideal becomes all that is ugly. And connecting with ugly, one of the probably most prominent prophet of modern bioethics, Peter Singer, has recently said in an interview that it's perfectly justifiable to abort a baby because the baby is ugly. And this brings home this idea of hatred of any imperfection, right? Hatred of what really is something quite trivial, but once you set the standard of utter perfection, then every imperfection becomes hated. When we see suffering in the world, we can take two quite divergent approaches. On the one hand, we can seek to alleviate the sufferings of those around us, as Bishop Sanchez emphasized this morning. On the other hand, we can dream of a world without suffering, which becomes a substitute for the world in which we live. In the latter case, we learn to hate the world in which we live. In the end, we do not seek to mend our broken world, we seek to eliminate it, to replace it. C.S. Lewis emphasizes that we must marvel at a child as a gift received, as someone with whom we can share our good, a good that we ourselves have received. If a child is not a gift, then he becomes a thing for satisfaction, a source for the parent's own exaltation. The child yearns for love. Instead, he gets only goods. He has all the things that money can buy, including exceptional intelligence and superhuman strength. But he is alone, miserably alone, and he knows it. Thank you.